This city looks like it has been hit by a bomb. The uprooted trees and damaged houses are testament to the destruction here. In February, two cyclones, Batsirai and Imnati, hit the eastern coast of Madagascar, leaving behind millions without shelter or access to food and water. Among the victims is Gita, a 29-year-old single mother of two. These state-run distributions provide 1 meal per day, chicken with rice and vegetables. When it comes to housing and other meals, Gita has to rely on herself.
Our home had already suffered a fire. This time it's completely destroyed. We don't have anywhere to go. I'm calling on the president to help us face this situation.
The Malagasy president visited Mananzare the day after Cyclone Batsirai struck. Tens of millions of dollars of international aid have been pumped into emergency operations in the area. But out of the 5,500 households here, 1,300 are still in need of a home.
On early Wednesday, March 23rd, the U.S. Geological Survey reported that an earthquake with a magnitude of 6.6 struck off the coast of Taiwan. The quake struck at a depth of about 6 miles, nearly 45 miles south of Hualien City. However, it did not trigger a tsunami warning. Taiwan's Central Weather Bureau said an initial quake of 5.4 magnitude had occurred at 1:06 a.m. It was followed by the big one of magnitude 6.6 at 1:41 a.m., and 2 minutes later came a 6.1 magnitude aftershock.
From the ground, from the sky, and on board. These images of an intercontinental ballistic missile were released by North Korea. The choreographed montage, akin to a film, was broadcast on national television. It showed Kim Jong-un personally overseeing the launch, which was North Korea's first full missile test since 2017. With international attention focused on Ukraine, it was meant to demonstrate the regime's military might as a nuclear force.
The implications of it is not so much the range, because we've known that North Korea can range the United States with its previous ICBMs that it has tested. But the size of this means that it can fit a lot more inside of it. So we're likely looking at a missile that can carry, for example, more than one warhead, right? So it could strike multiple targets with a single missile.
Flight data shows the missile, dubbed the Hwasong-17, flew higher at 6,000 kilometers and longer for over 1,000 kilometers than any other the regime has ever tested. The massive launch was swiftly condemned by the international community.
The launch of the long-range missile risks a significant escalation of tensions in the region. The Secretary General urges the DPRK to desist from taking any further counterproductive actions.
The United States imposed new sanctions on North Korea Thursday, on top of more sanctions towards Russia. The UN Security Council is slated to meet Friday to discuss what many are calling a monster of a missile launch.
People living on these islands off the coast of the mainland are watching events unfold in Ukraine as Chinese warplanes carry out incursions into Taiwan's air defense zone. 64-year-old Lin Zhisho has always lived with the threat that China might seize Dongyin Island by force.
If they provoke us, we still can't touch them. If they want to fly over the island, just let them fly. If you shoot them down, everything will be over. I'm not kidding you. It would be the start of the Third World War. It's really too scary. It wouldn't even just be us and the mainland fighting. Other countries would surely also join in the fight. Just look at the war between Russia and Ukraine. If they use atomic bombs, it'll all be over. No country would be able to escape.
Dongyin is only 50 kilometers off the mainland. The island is home to a missile base, and military drills are held regularly to prepare for potential assault by Chinese forces.
First of all, it needs to be pointed out that Taiwan is not Ukraine. The Taiwan question and the Ukraine issue are different in nature. Fundamentally, Taiwan is an inalienable part of China's territory. The Taiwan question is purely China's internal affairs, and there can be no foreign interference. The two sides across the Taiwan Strait must be and will be reunified. It is the trend of history that can never be stopped by anyone or any force.
For younger people, that's now easier to imagine.
I don't think the threat of the war has a big influence on our daily lives, but of course it will come up in everyone's conversations. But we will discuss it in a rather light-hearted manner. For example, when we explore strongholds, we would discuss, if a war really starts, which nearby stronghold we would run to. Because recently there's been discussion about bomb shelters in Taiwan, about where to go to take shelter and so on.
But life goes on as usual here, and people hope that isn't about to change. Andrew Chappelle, Al Jazeera. Fires burned through the night following an attack on Saudi Aramco oil refineries and storage facilities. It's the second attack in as many days on a major complex on the outskirts of Jeddah. By daybreak on Saturday, with plumes of smoke still billowing above the city, the Saudi-led coalition had launched retaliatory strikes across the border into Yemen. The coalition says the Iran-backed rebels struck Jeddah and another facility in Jazan to try and impact the nerve center of the world economy.
Aramco facilities in Jeddah, as well as vital facilities in the Saudi enemy's capital Riyadh, were targeted with a barrage of winged missiles. Ras Tanura and Rabiq oil refineries were targeted by a huge number of drones.
The facility is 20 kilometers from Jeddah's race circuit, where drivers were practicing for Saudi Arabia's second Formula One Grand Prix.
It's not a bit of a burning feeling, but I'm not sure if it's my car or another car.
Organizers say the race will go ahead on Sunday. Saudi officials maintain the attacks have no impact on daily life in Jeddah. The Houthis have rejected a Gulf Cooperation Council proposal for talks in Riyadh, but say they could happen in a neutral country.
Materially speaking, it doesn't cause enough damage to qualify as a strategic hit. Whenever they hit targets that either in Saudi Arabia or the UAE, it's a hit against tourism in these countries, that you can't run car races and international games as if nothing is happening while we are under siege and while we are being struck on a daily basis from the air. So it certainly alarms people who are visiting this area, because they never know when these rockets are going to hit.
Across the border, Houthi media outlets say 8 people were killed in one strike in Yemen's capital, Sana'a. The war is now in its 8th year. The UN says it has killed more children under the age of 5 than combatants on the battlefield. The UN believes 377,000 Yemenis have died as a result of direct causes like airstrikes and indirect causes like hunger and preventable disease, what aid agencies describe as true hell on earth. And on Saturday, tens of thousands of people poured into the streets in Sana'a and other Houthi-controlled areas to mark what they called National Resilience.
We were here when Russia launched its first missiles and airstrikes a month ago today. But instead of a lightning invasion, Russian forces appear to have stalled, with Ukraine claiming it's killed 6 Russian generals and even destroyed a Russian Navy ship this morning. The human cost of this war, though, is horrifying. If Vladimir Putin thought he'd score an easy victory in Ukraine, he knows better now. In just 1 month, between 7,000 and 15,000 Russian soldiers have been killed, according to a NATO official. The Ukrainians are still outgunned, yet in some places they're clawing back territory from the invaders. But the cost of this brutal invasion is being paid in the lives of civilians. The besieged city of Mariupol has been laid to waste by Putin's forces, with more than 100,000 people still thought to be trapped inside. 15-year-old Masha made it out of Mariupol, but had her right leg amputated after it was torn apart in a Russian strike. Her doctor says she's so traumatized she couldn't eat for days.
It breaks my hearts of all Ukrainians and every free person on the planet.
In a video message last night, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky accused Russia of trying to wipe Ukrainians off the face of the earth.
This is only the beginning for Russia on the Ukrainian land.
In the city of Zhytomyr, Sergei is sifting through the wreckage of his home. He spent 12 years building it for his family, he told us, but Russian airstrikes destroyed it earlier this month, killing 4 in his neighbourhood. One of them was Sergei's daughter, Katya, who's left behind a 1-year-old daughter. I wish I'd died in her place, Sergei told us. The pain doesn't go away.
Who do you blame for this?
Of course I blame Putin, he said. If I had him in my hands, I'd butcher him like a goat. Sergei says he'll raise his granddaughter, and like other Ukrainians, he's determined to rebuild. In the shattered city of Kharkiv this week, a cellist played in the rubble, creating beauty even amid the terror of this ugly war. This is a country where the will to survive and fight for freedom at any cost is simply staggering.
Speaking from the grounds of the Royal Castle in Warsaw, Poland, U.S. President Joe Biden forcefully declared Russian President Vladimir Putin must go.
For God's sake, this man cannot remain in power.
It sounded like a major shift in U.S. policy. Previously, U.S. officials, including the Secretary of State Antony Blinken, have denied the United States is seeking regime change in Russia. From this location on NATO's eastern flank, Biden also addressed the Russian leader directly, calling his invasion a strategic failure and warning him not to expand the conflict.
Don't even think about moving on 1 single inch of NATO territory. We have a sacred obligation under Article 5 to defend each and every inch of NATO territory with the full force of our collective power.
Earlier in the day, as Biden met with Poland's president, he reiterated, as a member of NATO, the U.S. and its partners will defend Poland if it's attacked. Poland shares a more than 500-kilometer border with Ukraine. Already, more than 4 million people have fled Ukraine, with more than half seeking refuge in Poland. As Biden met with mothers at a makeshift refugee center set up in Warsaw's National Stadium, he reiterated his belief that the Russian president is a war criminal for allegedly targeting civilians.
You're dealing every day with Vladimir Putin. I mean, look at what he's done to these people. What does it make you think? He's a butcher.
Also on Saturday, Biden met with the Ukrainian defense and foreign ministers who had made a rare trip out of Ukraine. Biden pledged support for Ukraine's sovereignty and characterized its resistance as a battle for freedom that may be a long fight.
The White House denies President Biden was calling for regime change in Russia, but instead says he was arguing that Vladimir Putin cannot be allowed to exercise power over the region. Still, Biden's message was unmistakable, that Russia's war in Ukraine is a battle for democracy. The free world must fight.
NATO chief Jens Stoltenberg has promised more troops would be deployed to Eastern Europe. He described the development as a major increase of forces. Other Western leaders present at the NATO summit announced tougher sanctions against Russia as the war in Ukraine enters its second month.
We will continue to impose unprecedented costs on Russia, and we will reinforce allied deterrence and defense. Leaders approved our 4 new battle groups in Bulgaria, Hungary, Romania and Slovakia. These are in addition to the 4 already in the Baltic countries and Poland.
Earlier this week, U.S. President Joe Biden claimed that Russia was considering the use of chemical and biological weapons in Ukraine. At the NATO summit, Biden vowed a response should Russia take that road.
We would respond. We would respond if he uses it. The nature of the response would depend on the nature of the use.
NATO leaders agreed to provide equipment to help Ukraine in the event of a chemical or biological attack. French President Emmanuel Macron confirmed that NATO would continue to help Ukraine defend itself against Russia.
The position of Allied forces hasn't changed. We will continue to provide legal and defensive weapons, and to do so in the most efficient way possible, without crossing the red line that would make us co-belligerent.
Ahead of the NATO summit, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said he was expecting meaningful steps. Western leaders showed a united front in Brussels today, but their decisions fell short of President Zelensky's demands. Other than weapons, he has called for a no-fly zone and for more radical economic sanctions.
Ellen, you're at a reception centre for refugees at the moment. Just tell us a little bit about who you've been speaking to and what it is that's happening there.
Well, that's right, Nadia. I'm at this reception centre for refugees, which is in the suburbs of Przemyśl, and it's being run by a combination of NGOs, volunteers, and there's Polish police here who are providing security. We're about 15 to 20 minutes away from the border at Medica, which is the main crossing point for Ukrainian refugees coming into Poland. And when they arrive there, they're given the option either to go directly to the train station at Przemyśl and continue their journeys, or to come here and spend the night to recuperate and rest a bit and maybe grab a bite to eat. And well, the building used to be a supermarket, and locals are actually still referring to it as Tesco's. And we know that many of the refugees who are arriving here, they have had very long and arduous journeys. We've heard about one woman who spent around 23 days on foot and ended up with a stress fracture in one of her feet after that journey. And when they do reach a centre, they're given bracelets and they're entered into a register, and that's so that there's control over who's allowed into the building, because we as journalists are not allowed to film in there, obviously, to give the refugees some privacy. We've been told by people working in the centre that it's divided into two areas. There's a sleeping zone and a sort of waiting area, which has flags up depending on where the refugees intend to carry on to.
A counterstrike by Vladimir Putin, as the Russian president hit back against mounting European sanctions. On Wednesday, he announced that Russia will start selling gas to unfriendly countries only in rubles.
I made a decision to take actions to switch payments for natural gas sold to so-called unfriendly countries into the Russian ruble in the shortest time possible.
He cited the sanctions against Russia as the reason for the change.
In the last few weeks, there were unlawful measures taken against Russia by a number of Western countries to freeze Russian assets. By doing this, the collective West has undermined the trust of their currencies.
The announcement has been met with backlash from European countries, with Italy already denouncing the move and insisting they will continue to use the euro. Since the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the price of the ruble has tumbled, but in the hours after Putin's announcement, the currency rose to its highest level against the dollar and euro since March the 2nd. This latest attempt by Putin to strengthen the Russian currency has been seen by some as a savvy move. Economist Andrew Weiss tweeted,
"Things are not going well for Putin in the Ukraine war. But a slew of news today should remind everyone that Putin definitely knows how to build and exploit leverage."
But as Europe continues to move away from its dependence on Russian oil, others believe that this latest announcement will make that move even swifter.
It's a popular fuel choice in France. Diesel is used in trucks, ships, boilers, trains, and of course cars. At the pump, a liter of diesel is normally less expensive than a liter of gas. But since the start of the war in Ukraine, diesel prices have soared.
On m'a dit l'essence ne prend pas une essence, c'est trop cher. Mais bon, je vois qu'actuellement c'est plus d'actualité.
Je ne sais pas pourquoi c'est devenu plus cher, c'est ça le problème. Parce qu'avant c'était l'essence qui était plus chère par rapport au gasoil. Mais là c'est le gasoil qui est plus cher par rapport à la... Ça a augmenté d'un seul coup. Hein.
As prices hit record highs in Europe, fears are growing about a possible shortage of Russian petroleum, which is easier to refine because of a low sulfur content. And major oil companies, including France's Total, have cut ties with Russia, canceling current energy contracts. But industry analysts say it's too early to worry about a shortage.
Si l'Europe devait décider d'un embargo, on reconsidérerait la situation pour estimer s'il y a une pénurie à venir ou pas. Mais pour l'instant, on ne voit pas venir de pénurie.
For its diesel needs, France could also turn to other suppliers, but that could mean adapting its refineries, which creates additional costs.
L'inquiétude, c'est plutôt sur le prix que tout cela va représenter, parce que fatalement, s'il faut faire des traitements supplémentaires, ça on peut faire, mais ça coûtera un peu plus cher et ça prendra un peu de temps aussi.
In case of a shortage, France could use its strategic diesel reserves, which has enough stockpiled for 3 months.
Let's have a look at the papers. There's one man who's dominated the British papers today. This is the British Finance Minister, Rishi Sunak, his mini budget, which he announced there.
That's right, and he's not looking good in the papers today, Stuart. Rishi Sunak announced cuts to payroll tax and duties on fuel in an attempt to alleviate soaring cost of living in the UK. He did stop short of imposing a new windfall tax on oil company profits, which campaigners were saying would bring more relief to households amid soaring inflation. He's also frozen the planned increase of benefit payments, so something that's made a lot of people angry. Nonetheless, he's accused of basically failing to do more to tackle the cost of living crisis. It's the worst cost of living crisis in about 70 years, Metro reports on its front page. The reality behind this mini budget is simply that Britons are facing no heat to eat. The anger is palpable across the dailies today. Look how the Daily Star reacts. The tabloid calls it the up yours mini budget. Usual load of utter bull from rich, insincere, smiling politician with nice teeth, the paper says. It's a focus of a cartoon from Peter Brooks today, who sort of sardonically imagines the cost of living crisis hitting Rishi Sunak himself. A year ago, he could have, bought a yacht. Today, he basically has a little dinghy. The Financial Times also looking at it on its front page. They've got the somber warning from Sunak that the UK should prepare for public finances to worsen even more.
Romans marching against the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Thousands together to condemn the atrocities of the war. But energy costs are also weighing on people's minds.
My last gas bill was €170, and the one I got this month was €270. €100 more. It's a huge blow for us.
It's worrying that we depend on only one supplier. We have to diversify our energy sources.
Diversifying its energy mix is now one of Italy and the European Union's priorities. Russia is the EU's top natural gas supplier, representing 40% of imports. Rome could turn to other suppliers too. Algeria currently provides 25% of its total consumption. And there are also the Gulf states, but a free market doesn't always favor Europe.
Qatar is the biggest liquefied natural gas producer in the world, and it sells this gas to the biggest importer, Japan. So it's clear that if Italy wants to increase its volume, Qatar can ask for some sort of compensation to divert some of its gas. These are commercial relationships, but they happen all within the framework of a political agreement between states.
Of the 27 member states, Germany is the most reliant on Russian energy. Over 50% of its gas and over 75% of its oil come from Russia. This factory in Brandenburg makes ceramic tiles. Its only source of energy is natural gas.
Every year, we consume between 12 and 13 million cubic meters of gas.
All of which is imported from Russia. A change of policy would bring production to a halt.
It would probably be a huge risk for us, because if Germany decides to ration its gas, the tiling industry probably won't be a top priority.
This dependence is increasingly unacceptable for German businesses and the German government. In this coal-producing region, industry is mobilizing for an urgent change in German energy policy.
We had decided to give up on nuclear and coal, but we should reconsider these decisions and think about whether they put the German economy at risk. When it comes to our energy needs, we can really see how dependent we are these days.
Whether Germany will slow its transition to clean energy in order to cope with this crisis isn't a foregone conclusion. In Berlin, anti-nuclear activists are resolutely opposed to this.
It's absurd, completely absurd.
I think we should put all our energy into solar panels and wind turbines, not nuclear or gas.
And Germany isn't the only country where these questions are asked. Groningen in the Netherlands has some of the richest natural gas deposits in Europe. But the extraction of these reserves was supposed to end this year because it caused many earthquakes.
Once, during an earthquake, I wanted to rush out, but this door wouldn't open. I could hear the walls cracking so loud that I thought the entire house was going to come down.
The war in Ukraine has made Rina especially worried. Turning away from Russian gas could delay the shutdown of the Groningen natural gas site.
So this is a kind of trade-off which has to be assessed by the Dutch society. Do we want to have more gas from the Groningen gas fields, reducing our gas dependence on Russia, keeping the gas system in balance, but at the price, at the expense of a higher risk of more earthquakes?
450 billion cubic meters of gas can still be exploited here, one of the deposits that Europe will be looking at in the coming months.
Mike Gunderson's family has been farming wheat, soybeans, and corn on this land since the 1950s. He expects the weather to throw him a curveball in farming, but not a war.
All the stuff in Ukraine, there's so much volatility in the market.
The U.S. imports $10.3 billion worth of fertilizer for crops. $1.3 billion of that comes from Russia, which is now off the market. The Minnesota Association of Wheat Growers says farmers lay down fertilizer at least twice a year.
There's a lot of fertilizers that are 4 and 5x more expensive than they were a year ago. Fertilizer has drastically outpaced the rate of inflation.
Russia's ban on fertilizer is scheduled to last until the end of the year. And while supply is already tight this year, it's the future many are worried about.